guys, it's Kayla from Kayla Lovejoy Equine Art, and today I kind of wanted to go over some paints and what I use to paint my models. So here I have a few models with me that I've painted, and to start off, I have this little guy here who is currently in primer. So for me personally, I like to use Rust-Oleum red primer. So from my experience, the red works out much better than the white just because the red goes on a lot thinner and it dries so much quicker. So typically I can give this about 24 hours, sometimes a little bit longer, to cure, and the model is good to go, ready to paint. With the white primer, I was noticing that it could take several days for it to cure, so it really slowed things down a lot and made things a little more challenging to work with. This stuff, it will fill in really fine scratches. The one nice thing about the white primer is that it does tend to fill in scratches a little bit better than this. Of course, this goes on thinner, so that would be why. Next, I typically start my model with a base coat. Next, I have this little guy, and he does have a base coat on him and a couple layers of pastels. So for my base coats, there's a lot of options for paints to use. So these are a few that I've used, and each of them works a little differently. So I bought the Tamiya paints. These are actually a really recent purchase, and I just started trying these. And that is what I base coated this little guy with, was this Tamiya paint here. And this is actually, the color is called Wood. So it's a Tamiya paint. It went on really nicely. It was really smooth. This I basically just put in my airbrush just as it is. I didn't have to water it down or change the viscosity in any way. I just put it in the airbrush and sprayed, and it worked perfectly. The one thing I did notice about this is it's a little bit, I guess, opaque. So if you want to build up multiple layers of color, it's a little bit more challenging to do with a paint like this, just because of its opaque quality. Another paint choice that I like using for base coats was Tamiya paints. So Tamiya paints are pretty expensive. I think this little jar on Amazon was like $7, and it's actually called Desert Yellow. The thing about Tamiya paints is they aren't exactly for model horses or anything. I think they're just for like model cars and stuff like that. This stuff is super, super matte. It goes on your model very matte, very flat. It has a good tooth to it, so it'll really hold any layers that you put over it. The only problems that I had with this was it does come ready to pour in your airbrush, so you just pour it in, you don't have to mix it with anything, it's perfectly good, ready to go. The issue that I had was it's hard to mix with other paints, so this stuff, even if you bought like another color and you were to try mixing this with white, it would not work well. It doesn't like to mix well with other paints, and so I had issues with that, and you have to kind of pick out a color to use and kind of take a guess. Like, I was just like, desert yellow? Okay, I mean, it looks kind of horse color-ish. So it's kind of a shot in the dark. The paints are expensive. They're really nice. They're good quality. Just a little more difficult to work with than other brands that I've used. So this model here was actually base coated with that desert yellow paint. So you can see that desert yellow showing through in her highlights, like in her flank area and stuff like that. So she was base coated with Tamiya paints. And this is one of my customs that I did a while back. This one's an old one of mine from, I don't even think she has a date on her, but she was probably done in like 2016, I would guess. And she's held up really well, and she still shows well. So, yeah. And then her body color was actually done with Golden Fluid paints. So, after trying a few paints, Golden Fluids were kind of my go-to paint for a while. They do need to be pre-mixed, and they do need something added to make them more airbrush friendly. A good option for making them more airbrush friendly is the Liquitex Matte Medium. I can mix this with it. A lot of times that will help thin it out a little, or the other one that works really well is Airbrush Medium. If you just get Liquitex Airbrush Medium, it really changes the viscosity of the paint so that it flows through the airbrush a lot better. Now, the Golden Fluid paints have worked really well for me, just being a little thicker You do have to mix them with water and stuff before they're airbrush friendly. They are pretty pricey. That's one of the biggest issues, I think, is really the price point on the Golden Fluid paints. It does last you a while if you get the large bottles, but it's hard to justify spending so much money sometimes on paint. A much less expensive option that's very similar in quality would be the Liquitex Basics paints. So these are really inexpensive. I think most of these in this size tube are like around $5 or so a tube. And this paint is super thick, so it really needs to be watered down a lot. The nice thing that I like about this is that it has, when it's watered down with like airbrush medium or even just water, it does kind of change the paint to be more of a transparent paint. So it has a little bit of a transparent quality, which works really well when you want to blend other paints and colors. So you can see this guy here. He does have a layer of pastels. That's what I use for his dapples. However, he was done mostly with Liquitex paints, and you can see that the blending on him and the shading is absolutely phenomenal. So he has really great shading because of that transparent quality of the paint. You don't get a lot of graininess, which is something that I try to avoid. You can see on the model here, like she was done using the Golden Fluid paints, and although they were thinned out, she still does have a lot of graininess, and that's just because of that opaque quality of the paint. Whereas when you've got a more transparent paint, you're going to get a finer, better blend. Okay, moving on, so I have my Golden Fluid paints here, and I mix my Golden Fluid paints and put them in little bottles like this. So these are typically Golden Fluid. Sometimes they're Liquitex, depending on what paint I feel like using. But I'll mix them and put them in these little bottles. So here I've got like my bright gold Palomino mix for the first base color, then the second layer, and then I do have another one for like a third and fourth layer, I believe, but I couldn't find them at the moment. Another paint option is the Createx transparent paint. So these are super transparent. Sometimes when you're painting with them, it's hard to notice if they're going on. You start to question, you're like, did I really just paint that? They are water-based paints, so they're nice and easy to work with. The one issue I had with these was that the colors seem very different from any other paint brand. So with like Liquitex and Golden Fluid, you have colors like Burnt Umber, Raw Sienna. You're going to be able to pick out those colors that work well for horse coats and that are kind of used across model horse customizing platforms. These do not have those types of colors. This color is dark brown, and that's all it's called. So there are fewer, I guess, browns than other brands too. So like the nice thing about the Vallejo paints are that you can find very many browns. There are so many different browns. There's wood, there's I guess dirt brown and like rust colors. There's a lot of different colors that would work well on a model horse, whereas with the transparent Createx paints, there aren't as many colors that would work well on a model horse. They are super, super thin, so these you can, again, just pour right into the airbrush and start spraying. Yeah, so the one thing is just you're going to have to mix paints to get exactly the color you want or something like that. I honestly haven't used them much. They just really aren't a favorite of mine, I guess. So next we have pastel powders. Pastel powders are another way of adding color to your model. My favorite to use are the pan pastels. They come in these little dishes like this, like little petri dishes. And they have all different colors. So this is Burnt Sienna, which is actually a color that I don't use a whole lot, but it is a color that's used to build up pastel layers. And you can see this model here. This model here, he has quite the layer of pastel powder on him, and that's how I was able to create his dapples, was by applying a pastel layer over him and then erasing away the little dapples. So he's a great example of a use of the powders. He was base coated in a solid color and then his color here was built up using pastels on his body. So this little guy as well, so he was built up, his color was built up actually using another type of powder pigment, which is the Pearl X. So I have these Pearl X pigments here, and these are super, super metallic. And they add a great sheen to your model. So you can see here, like, this guy was done with pan pastels. He's got a very matte, flat kind of look, which is nice. And then this guy has a very metallic look to him. So it's hard to see, I think, on the camera, but he is very, very metallic. And that is because I built up a lot of color using the Pearl X. And then on top of that, I added a layer of pan pastel, which gave me the darker color where I was able to add the dapples. So there you have it. This is kind of my paint. So there you have it. These are the paints that I use on a regular basis to paint models. Again, I've kind of gotten away from using the Tamiya paint. It's just not really economical and not really one of my favorites. And the Createx, I don't really use that so much. But these paints right here are all pretty regularly used. I've just gotten into using the Vallejo paints here, so I like them so far. I think they're great for doing base coats. I think I'm going to continue with those. And I do have my golden fluids. So the golden fluids right now are really my go-to paint for painting hooves and eyes and manes and tails, any sort of little detail work. The golden fluid is my paint of choice. As for building up body color, I really like the Liquitex Basics. I think those work well. And yeah. Well, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment below. I'll try to get back to you and answer your questions. If you have any video suggestions or things you'd like to see, again, leave a comment.